Ukrainian forces have claimed their first success in a long-anticipated counteroffensive as they recaptured 3 villages from Russia on Sunday. Kyiv's forces posted unverified video showing soldiers hoisting the Ukrainian flag at a bombed-out building in the village of Blahodatne in the Donetsk region and posing with the unit's flag in the adjacent village of Neskuchne. Kyiv officials have imposed a strict period of operational silence and urged Ukrainians not to disclose any information that could compromise the operation. The occupied southeast is seen as a priority for Kyiv's forces that may threaten Russia's land bridge to the annexed peninsula of Crimea and split the Russian forces in half.
Russia on Monday claimed that its army foiled a large-scale offensive by Ukraine in the seized region of Donetsk and killed more than 250 pro-Kyiv troops. The Russian Defense Ministry released drone footage of what it claimed to be Ukrainian armored vehicles in a field blowing up after being hit. The ministry spokesman said Ukrainian forces launched the attack on Sunday morning, but, quote, had no success. He added the Russian side killed 250 enemy troops and took out 40 military vehicles, including tanks. Reuters was unable to immediately verify Russia's claims, and there was no immediate comment from Kyiv. In a Wall Street Journal interview published on Saturday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said his country was ready to launch a counteroffensive, but he made no mention of the assault in his regular evening video address on Sunday. It was unclear whether the reported attack by Ukraine signaled the start of a long-expected counteroffensive to recapture some of the territory taken by Russia after last year's invasion. Meanwhile, there has been constant shelling along the Ukrainian-Russian border, destroying homes and killing civilians. An eyewitness on the Ukraine side said she saw 2 women being killed.
2 women came here after shelling started, one from this house and one from the other. They stood here for 2 minutes talking to each other, and a second shell explodes here. I was thrown behind the wall by the wave from the explosion, but one of the women, her hand was torn off, and the other one died immediately. The woman who lost a hand died shortly after.
Ukraine forces have also been blamed for some of the cross-border shelling. Kyiv denied direct involvement, but has cast them as a consequence of Russia's invasion.
And I'm joined by Valentin Yakushek of the Ukrainian Institute of Politics. Thank you, Mr. Yakushek, for joining us on CNN News 18. How do you see this start to the Ukrainian counteroffensive?
Well, there is already the second week of Ukrainian counteroffensive, but it's the initial stage of this part of the war, which starts with Ukrainian counteroffensive. After, there was a stage of frontal fighting without serious advances of any participant in this war, with the exception of Ukrainian advance in September in Kharkiv region, very successful offensive, and later liberation of Kherson region, of city of Kherson. So 2 successful counteroffensive of Ukraine. Then there was a stalemate. Now there is a chance that all the expected, all by Ukrainians, offensive will lead to Ukrainian troops coming to the Azov Sea and closer to Crimea. That is the expectation and definitely the plan of Ukrainian military authorities. Now, some villages are liberated near the front line. Some square kilometers of Ukrainian land came back under Ukrainian control. But we cannot say what will be the result, because the art of war is a very serious thing. We know how it may happen, as it was, for example, in 1943, when the battle near Kursk was taking place. When Germans started their offensive, Soviet troops were waiting for them to attack and then there was severe counterattack of the Soviet troops. Definitely, Ukrainian military leadership is aware of this kind of possible military activities. And the situation is very unstable and difficult, as Russian troops very well prepared for the defense. Russians have advantage in artillery and aviation, but generous support of the Ramstein coalition of more than 50 Western and pro-Western countries support to Ukraine leads that Ukraine has the newest Western tanks, armored carrier machines, and so on. Every day, Ukraine receives the necessary information, intelligence information from American and Western, in general, satellites and other sources. The forces are approximately equal between Ukraine and Russia. Nobody can predict what will be the result. We are at this stage of fierce fighting, and the nearest couple of weeks will show if Ukrainians' high morale and preparedness for the offensive will lead to the Ukrainian army coming to the Azov Sea, or the Russians will be able to stop Ukrainian offensive, and there will be a new element of stalemate in the conflict. If Ukrainian troops have problems on this stage and Russians start advance, we heard the position of the former Secretary General of NATO, Mr. Rasmussen. He said that Polish troops will be able to enter into action on Ukrainian territory the same as the Baltic states. So it's one of the positions, but he is not just an ordinary person. He is well known in Western establishment, and what he says is definitely in the minds and hearts of many NATO officials. So if the situation exacerbates, we can see that the Western countries will not only increase their supply of weapons and ammunition, but also will send not only occasional persons as advisors, but in the mass sending Polish and Baltic state citizens to Ukraine. As Mr. Rasmussen, former Secretary General of NATO, said, we will have difficult period of fierce fighting in the nearest weeks and probably months. It is new stage of the tragedy of Ukrainian people when Ukrainian infrastructure is being destroyed, when thousands of Ukrainian soldiers and officers are dying. But at the same time, it's the tragedy for Russians, for Russian soldiers, for ordinary Russian citizens. The leadership of Russia put Russia into a trap in February last year when unprovoked attack on Ukraine took place. So it's a tragedy of both nations. And it reminds me, in the context of Indian history, a Kurukshetra battle between the closest relatives who fight with each other, who die, and after that, there starts a new era in the development of the civilization. So we are facing the difficult processes of changing not only the regimes after this war, but also changing of the contents of the international relations. International relations have to be humanized, because now we see that old imperialist practices have came into life at this stage. We are suffering of these old age practices. Hopefully, this stage of tragedy will not last long. And as Henry Kissinger, who is already 100 years old, but he is a very wise person, he said that by the end of this year, the most likely there will be negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine supported by the Western nations, NATO nations, first of all. We are going through difficult, dangerous times of direct conflict, of thousands of people dying, of infrastructures destroyed. And now you see that infrastructures are being destroyed not only on the territory of Ukraine, but there is widening of the territory of the war to the Russian neighboring regions. The war comes to a dangerous point when there may be direct involvement of other countries into this conflict.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Yakushik, for sharing that comprehensive perspective when it comes to the Ukrainian counteroffensive. But shifting focus, Mondelez International, the maker of Oreo, is facing corporate boycott in the Nordic region over its continued presence in Russia. Mondelez International had asked to meet with the Norwegian government to protect its local business. Locals have boycotted its products.
Oreo maker Mondelez is in trouble in the Nordic region. Locals are not happy about the US firm's continued presence in Russia and have boycotted its products. Major Nordic companies like airlines SAS and Norwegian Air announced they will stop selling its products. Leading hotel chains, shipping groups and the Norwegian Football Association also said they'd do the same. Many major Western companies sold their Russian assets after Moscow invaded Ukraine last year, but some, like Mondelez, stayed. Nordic companies said they stopped selling its products after Ukraine blacklisted the snap maker. The global giant has a strong presence in Norway and Sweden via local brands that it owns. It released a statement to say it would look to meet with relevant government ministries to explain its position. The Toblerone maker further said it did not sell Russian-made products in Norway. Mondelez claimed it had limited activity in Russia but stopped investment and advertising. It also condemned the war.